Alright, Kimchi Jjigae, one of my favorite dishes of all time, especially in the winter or whenever it's slightly chilly outside. This dish is the perfect spicy stew to warm you up. First off, there are many different kinds of jjigaes, jjigae meaning stew. Today we are going to be focusing on a kimchi and pork jjigae, so we're just going to call it Kimchi Jjigae. Probably the most popular jjigae, but I'm probably wrong on that and I'm sure I'll hear about it. Alright, so this recipe and technique is pretty classic. A couple of points I'd like to touch on. This stew is much more delicious if you use an older, more pungent, stronger kimchi. Meaning just a kimchi that you've had in the fridge for probably a little too long. So to reiterate, this recipe is perfect for that old jar of kimchi that's been in the back of your fridge since like 2009. And with kimchi, there's really no such thing as a little too long, but you know. There's definitely a difference between fresh kimchi and older kimchi. This dish is good with the older kimchi. I mean, I've made it with both, and I really do like it with the older kimchi. So that culinary dogma is pretty correct. Anyways, I will stop talking. Here's how I make my version of Kimchi Jjigae. Most of the prep is straightforward for this dish, but there are a couple things that I like to do slightly differently. I like to cut the pork belly into strips, almost like little lardons. Here I'm using some gorgeous strips of Berkshire belly. Cutting the belly into strips and then bringing them up to heat in a cold pan allows for the fat to render and the pork to crisp up. This step is totally optional, but I also like to press my tofu to drain out as much water as possible. This way, the tofu absorbs the flavor from the jjigae broth better and also firms up a little bit in texture. Simply sandwich the tofu in between two plates lined with some paper towel. Pop a heavy object on top and let the water press out for 15 to 20 minutes. Now it's time to siphon some kimchi juice. Using older kimchi if possible, press down on the kimchi with the back of a spoon to scoop out about a quarter cup of what we're going to call the brine. Just get a load of that salty red gold. The brine is packed with umami and saltiness from the fermentation process that will help season our jjigae. You've probably noticed that I line my cutting board with some parchment paper. That's to protect my cutting board from kimchi stains. Cutting boards have two mortal enemies, those being kimchi and turmeric. Alright, so our tofu should be relatively drained by now. You'll know when it's ready when the paper towel is completely soaked. Cut up your tofu into whatever shape makes you a happy little boy and or girl, and set that aside. Next, we'll need a flavorful liquid to make this stew a stew. In my case, I'm using an umami blaster known as anchovy stock. Be sure to peep my video if you'd like to make your own. It's pretty easy and doesn't take up your entire day like some stock making techniques do. I'm just thawing mine from the freezer in a small saucepan. Grab yourself a pot or a pan with high-sided walls and put it on the burner. Without heat, add in the pork belly. Turn on the heat to medium and let the fat from the pork coax out into the pan. This process is known as rendering. The fat will reward us with crispy pork bits and a killer fond at the bottom of the pan. After 10 or so minutes, the pork should be crispy and ready to drain on a paper towel lined tray or plate. In this situation, I like to use a fish spatula to pick up these pork bits, but leave most of the rendered fat behind. You'll have a lot of excess fat in the pan, so pour out like 80% of it into a heat-proof cup and set it aside. Now we are going to deglaze the fond from the bottom of the pan using our chopped kimchi and sliced onions. The water and liquid from the veg will release into the pan, allowing us to scrape off the fond and add its flavor into our jjigae. Also, this step makes doing dishes a lot easier, so if anything, don't skip it for that reason. Now, we'll start adding additional flavors, starting with our gochugaru, aka Korean chili flakes. These flakes come in both mild and spicy, but of course I'm using spicy. Next up is the gochujang, or fermented hot chili pepper paste. This stuff is spicy, a touch sweet, and very rich. Then pop in a bit of sugar to balance the heat and kosher salt. And we can't forget about our kimchi milk, or brine, or really whatever you want to call it. I actually kind of like kimchi milk. Then we'll do some toasted sesame oil. This stuff is very strong, so start out with a dash and then add more if you want. And to tie it all together, our Korean anchovy stock, or yuksu. Mix it around a bit, keep the heat on medium, and cover for about 10 to 15 minutes. After this time, your jjigae should look like scrumptious edible lava. We are now ready to add in the green onion, tofu, and shroomers. I like to baste the tofu with some of the soup. And my mushroom of the hour will be enoki mushrooms. These are sort of like little long chewy noodle shrooms, and in my opinion they completely level up the soup. Now take some of that reserved pork fat and drizzle a touch on top of the mushrooms and the tofu. This will help infuse the soup with porky aroma since we haven't added any of the pork yet. Cover and cook again for another 10 minutes, and we made it. Cut the heat and admire your gorgeous creation. And it's plating time. Or bowling time. I really don't know what it is in this situation. Scoop in some of the veggies, mushrooms, and tofu. I'm using a dukbaegi or Korean clay pot, which the soup can actually be directly cooked in too. Garnish with a little more green onion and top with the crispy pork bits. I like to add the pork at the end so it stays crisp rather than getting all gloopy in the cooked jjigae. And that's a completed jjigae. And maybe just a few more scallions. Alright, it's time to go in. I like to eat my jjigae with a side of white rice. Just pop a couple scoops, a couple pinches of everything in the bowl over the rice and just kinda, go to town. Feast your eyes. Now that's knee-bendingly good. Alright, there you have it. A little bit of tofu, that crispy pork, that little addition of the pork fat. Man, I just smashed that entire bowl, but I would probably rewind time and do it again. Anyways, thanks for sticking around. If you did enjoy this video, please consider subscribing. It motivates me to continue on, even though I would probably just gonna continue on regardless. But seriously, every little bit of support helps and I definitely appreciate it. And until next time, peace.